Have you ever stopped to imagine what happens when God Himself decides to intervene in the midst of history? When the heavens open and the tremors of His presence make even the strongest walls tremble? Today, we will delve into an extraordinary episode that demonstrates God's absolute power over Jerusalem, a city marked by arrogant kings, threats from powerful empires, and a people divided between true faith and empty religiosity. Imagine for a moment being in that time, the tension in the air, the shadow of great empires approaching, and a feeling of unease taking hold of every heart. Do you feel the weight of history? Do you sense the anticipation of what is about to happen? For it was precisely in this turbulent scenario that God decided to act directly, shaking the earth and hearts, and showing that no human power can resist His will. Jerusalem, a city full of promise, but also of pride and challenges, was about to witness something that would forever change the understanding of faith and justice. It was in this context that Isaiah emerged, an ordinary man chosen to contemplate divine glory and convey messages that would span the centuries. Isaiah saw firsthand the conflict between the arrogance of kings and the sovereignty of the Lord. He was the prophet who, with courage and devotion, faced powerful kings and messengers of cruel empires, proclaiming the word of the eternal God. And it is precisely this connection between divine intervention and human frailty that draws our attention today. I ask you, would you be ready to recognize God's presence even in the midst of fear and uncertainty? The story we will explore reveals moments of profound tension. Kings like Uzziah, consumed by pride, defying the sacred and confronted by divine judgment. Leaders who, even faced with imminent threats from neighboring nations, hesitate to trust in the Lord. And yet God, with mercy and wisdom, shows clear signs of hope and restoration. Imagine Jerusalem being shaken by tremors, not just physical but spiritual, and the entire city palpably feeling the presence of a just and sovereign God. It is precisely this drama that makes the story of Isaiah and the kings of Judah a timeless lesson. Faith, obedience, and the certainty that God intervenes, even when all seems lost. And it is precisely at this point that the narrative invites us to reflect on ourselves. How often do we feel surrounded by problems, injustices, or threats that seem greater than our faith? How often do we doubt God's power to intervene in our lives? But here in Jerusalem, divine intervention left no doubt. Signs were given, miracles occurred, and the promise of protection and restoration was fulfilled, revealing the glory and sovereignty of the Lord in an impressive way. Now prepare yourself. What you are about to discover goes beyond wars, kings, and empires. It is a clear demonstration that God acts on behalf of those who trust in Him, and that His justice and mercy walk hand in hand. The next part of this story will show even more intensely how Isaiah, with courage and faith, confronted leaders, proclaimed messages of hope, and witnessed miracles that made Jerusalem tremble, not from fear of the enemy, but from the powerful presence of the Lord. So, if you want to understand how God intervenes in surprising ways in history, how heavenly signs change the course of events, and how true faith manifests itself in times of crisis, stay with me. What you're about to see will challenge your mind, touch your heart, and renew your hope. And believe me, after this revelation, you'll never look at Jerusalem or your own life the same way again. And before we move on to the most impressive moments of this divine intervention, I want to make a special request of you. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, if you feel God's strength and presence, even just by hearing about Jerusalem being shaken, leave a comment below with your thoughts, emotions, or even questions. Share your thoughts, emotions, or even your questions, because your participation is crucial for us to build a community of faith and learning together. Each comment helps us understand how this message touches lives, and your engagement inspires others to connect with these powerful stories from the Bible and the spiritual world. And don't forget, if you haven't yet left a like, do so now. It's the simplest and most direct way to show that you want to see more content like this, deepening your understanding of sacred history and the divine interventions that changed the course of humanity. Each like is a sign that together we are keeping the message of the prophets alive, allowing more people to know the glory of God and draw closer to true faith. Oh, and subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell so you don't miss any videos, because each episode we prepare is designed to strengthen your faith, renew your hope, and reveal God's power in ways you never imagined. Here, you'll have access to detailed analyses, profound biblical stories, and interpretations that connect ancient Jerusalem to the challenges and lessons of our time. By subscribing, you not only support the channel, but also ensure that these transformative messages reach more hearts, spreading knowledge and inspiration to all who seek to live closer to God's will. So, leave your comment right now, like this video, and subscribe, because the journey we'll continue to follow together isn't just about historical facts. It's about seeing God's hand at work, feeling the tremors of His presence, and learning to recognize signs that can change our lives. Your interaction is essential for this message to reach further, touching those who haven't yet had the chance to experience God's power manifested through prophets like Isaiah. And believe me, by interacting, you're not only helping the channel grow, but also strengthening your own faith. Every comment, every like, every subscription is an opportunity to reflect, share hope, and connect deeply with the eternal truths that the Bible and the spiritual universe reveal to us. Now that you've done your part, prepare to delve into Isaiah's extraordinary vision, where he witnesses the glory of God, the seraphim proclaiming, "Holy, holy, holy," and the tremors that shook Jerusalem not only physically, but spiritually. Stay with me, because the next part will demonstrate in stunning detail how faith, courage, and divine presence transform destinies and leave lessons that span centuries. While a heavy silence still hung over Jerusalem, following the tremors that had shaken the ground and the hearts of the people, Isaiah's vision in the temple began to unfold in a stunning way, revealing a scene no one could forget. Imagine the scene. The prophet himself, an ordinary man, the son of Amos, approaches the altar with a heavy heart, aware of the responsibility of delivering a divine message that would change not only his generation, but the entire history of God's people. The tension is palpable, and it is in this moment that we feel the intensity of God's presence. The glory of the Lord, incomparable and absolute, fills the space, and Isaiah, even as a man of faith, realizes how small and imperfect he truly is before the Creator. It is here that our understanding of the sacred expands and our spiritual connection is strengthened. Above the prophet seraphim, celestial beings with 6 wings each circle and proclaim incessantly, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory." Each word echoes like thunder, and the foundations of the temple doors tremble, demonstrating that God's holiness is not just a distant idea, but a reality that transforms any environment and any life that approaches Him with sincerity. Isaiah feels his heart race, his lips impure before such great holiness, and a sense of condemnation and recognition of his own sin takes over his being. "Woe is me, I am lost," he exclaims, aware that even though he is a dedicated man, he lives among a people who often stray from true devotion. This experience makes us reflect on our own lives, on how often we feel small in the face of God's challenges and presence. But it also reminds us that He chooses human instruments precisely because of His grace, not because of our perfection. It is at this moment that one of the seraphim, in a gesture laden with symbolism and mercy, approaches Isaiah with a burning coal taken from the altar, touching his lips with tongs. The purification is immediate, and the prophet's guilt is removed. This seemingly small detail reveals something very profound. God does not reject us for our imperfections. He transforms us, prepares us, and sends us courageously to fulfill our mission. Isaiah, now purified and ready, clearly hears the voice of the Lord, calling to him, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And the prophet's response is immediate and full of surrender. "Here I am, send me." This moment is a turning point, not only for the history of Judah, but also for our understanding of faith and obedience, showing that when God intervenes, He gives us purpose, direction, and a strength that goes beyond our human comprehension. But the mission Isaiah receives is not simple. God warns that His word will face resistance, disbelief, and even hostility. He would be a messenger of truth amidst unbelief and human pride, an instrument of judgment and mercy, hope and warning. The prophet would understand firsthand that transmitting God's word is not about immediate approval or human recognition, but about faithfulness and courage in the face of truth. And this connects us directly with our own challenge. How often do we feel discouraged in the face of unbelief or resistance to what we know to be right? Isaiah teaches us that faithfulness in proclaiming the truth, even when it seems difficult, generates eternal impact and transforms lives, and it is precisely this kind of courage that causes God to intervene in ways beyond our imagination. While Jerusalem still bore the weight of the threat of foreign empires, the city became the stage for a spiritual experience that blended fear, reverence, and hope. Isaiah saw in vivid detail that divine intervention is not merely physical or political, but profoundly spiritual. He understood that the tremors that shook the city's ground were a reflection of God's presence, and that every natural or historical event that seemed random was in fact under the Creator's sovereign control. It is at this point that the power of the biblical narrative engages us. We are not merely faced with past events, but with eternal teachings that continue to touch hearts. And it is precisely this emotional connection that makes this story so powerful. As we witness God's zeal for His people, the purity of the seraphim, the purification of Isaiah, and the call to mission, we begin to understand that every tremor, every sign, every divine intervention is an opportunity for transformation, both collective and individual. It is impossible to remain indifferent to a story so charged with meaning, and it is precisely this impact that we want to share with you in this video. Now, as we prepare to delve even deeper into Isaiah's vision and God's revelation of Jerusalem's future, we feel our anticipation growing. Every word, every gesture, every detail connects us with the essence of the spiritual universe and with sacred history spanning centuries. Stay with me, because the next part will reveal not only the historical events, but also the eternal promises, the miraculous signs, and the glory of God that can still touch our lives in a direct and transformative way today. As soon as the ground of Jerusalem returned to apparent calm, the people still felt the impact of the tremors. But something much more profound began to unfold behind the scenes of the city: God's direct intervention in the history of its kings and the lives of its people. Isaiah, now purified and aware of his mission, became the channel through which the Lord transmitted warnings, promises, and signs in an extraordinary way. It is impossible to underestimate the weight of this moment. The prophet's every gesture carried the authority of the Creator. Every word spoken reflected a divine purpose that transcended generations. And it is at this point that we understand how God acts strategically, not only miraculously, but also by preparing hearts and minds to receive His truth. When King Hezekiah faced the relentless threat of Sennacherib, the leader of Assyria, all of Jerusalem went on alert. Fortified cities fell, rumors of destruction spread, and fear gripped the people. But there, amidst the panic, Isaiah was sent with a clear and powerful word from the Lord. "Do not fear, for I will protect this city. He will not enter it, nor will he launch an arrow, nor will he erect a siege ramp. I will defend it for my own sake and for the sake of David, my servant." This intervention was not merely military, but spiritual. God demonstrated that he is sovereign over all nations, over all human strategy, and that his power can change the course of history in ways invisible to mortal eyes. Hezekiah, though initially shaken and fearful, sought the Lord with a humble heart. He covered himself with sackcloth, tore his clothes in mourning, and prayed intensely in the temple. Every word of supplication, every tear shed, was not only an act of devotion, but a manifestation of faith in divine sovereignty. Isaiah as messenger conveyed the Lord's answer. The city would be saved, the enemy would return by the same path from which they came, and God's protection would be manifest, a sign that no human plan can prevail against his will. It is at this moment that we realize how active faith and sincere obedience can yield supernatural results, making it evident that God acts on behalf of those who seek him with all their heart. But divine intervention didn't stop there. God, in his wisdom, also demonstrated visible supernatural signs to confirm his word. King Uzziah's sundial was used as an instrument of miracle. The shadow receded exactly 10 degrees, tangibly proving that the Lord's promise was true. This kind of manifestation not only strengthened the faith of the king and his people, but also reminds us that God is meticulous, patient, and meticulous in his ways. Every sign, every miracle, every intervention is carefully planned so that we can perceive his presence, trust his word, and understand that he is in absolute control, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. While the physical tremors in Jerusalem had passed, the spiritual and emotional tremors continued to resonate in the hearts of every inhabitant. Isaiah's message, delivered with divine precision, shows us that true security and peace come not from human alliances, powerful armies, or accumulated riches, but from complete trust in God, who sees the future and remains faithful to his promises. It is fascinating to realize that, even amid fear, the threat of destruction, and unbelief, the Lord works to transform seemingly desperate circumstances into opportunities for faith, hope, and spiritual transformation. And here lies the most profound point of this narrative. Every tremor, every warning, every supernatural sign sent by God is a reminder that he is always present, watching, guiding, and intervening. The city of Jerusalem, with all its history of glory, pride, and vulnerability, became the stage for eternal lessons on the need to trust, obey, and recognize the Creator's sovereignty. Isaiah shows us in rich detail that God's power is not limited to grandiose miracles. He works in the details, in the signs, in the courageously spoken words, and in the acts of genuine faith, shaping the destiny of a nation and the spiritual future of its people. And it is precisely this understanding that connects us directly to our own path. Every challenge we face, every moment of fear or doubt can become an opportunity to see divine intervention in action. God's presence is real. His power is infinite, and his promises are eternal. Continuing this narrative, we will delve even deeper into the details of Isaiah's prophecies, the signs God sent, and the way he continues to touch hearts even centuries later, revealing that, when he intervenes, tremors not only shake the ground, but transform lives forever. To understand the true magnitude of divine intervention in Jerusalem, we must go back a few years before the Tremors and Assyrian threats to the reign of King Uzziah, a ruler who at first glance seemed blessed with prosperity, military strength, and extraordinary wealth. The kingdom of Judah enjoyed economic stability, strategic expansion, and relative security in times of threatening empires around it, such as Assyria. However, a nation's true strength is measured not only by wealth or military might, but by the hearts of its leaders and the alignment of its people with divine principles. And it was precisely at this point that Uzziah failed, and it is here that we learn one of the most profound lessons about pride, disobedience, and divine judgment. King Uzziah, after decades on the throne, began to be overcome by a sense of self-sufficiency. His success, his ability to govern, and his popularity grew to the point of corrupting his heart. He began to believe that the power he wielded was the result of his own strength, his own strategies and decisions, rather than the divine providence that silently and steadily sustained the nation. This arrogance, which may seem harmless to human eyes, became an opening for God's judgment, showing that even amidst periods of prosperity and apparent stability, pride is fertile ground for downfall. The biblical narrative details a crucial moment that symbolizes this spiritual deviation. Uzziah, in a gesture of pride and presumption, entered the temple of the Lord with the intention of burning incense on the altar, a task exclusive to the priests, those chosen and consecrated to mediate contact between the people and the Creator. Imagine the scene. The king's heart inflamed with self-confidence, approaching the Holy of Holies, believing that his earthly authority could supersede divine order. The alarmed priests tried to prevent the act, reminding him that the service did not belong to him, that the sanctity of the altar could not be violated by human pride. But Uzziah reacted with anger, stubbornness, and arrogance, demonstrating that even the strongest leaders can be blinded by their own ego. And it was at that moment, while he was still expressing his indignation and refusing to acknowledge the limits of his standing before God, that the Lord manifested his judgment immediately and unmistakably. A spot of leprosy suddenly appeared on his forehead, a physical and spiritual punishment that served as a warning not only to him, but to all of Jerusalem. The shock of the moment could not be ignored. The priests who witnessed the scene were terrified, and the king himself, aware of the gravity of what had occurred, fled the temple, realizing that the hand of the Almighty had touched his life definitively. Uzziah's pride, which for so many years had been his strength and source of self-esteem, now became the cause of his public humiliation and forced isolation. From that day on, Uzziah was cut off from the temple and forced to live in isolation, marked by divine punishment. Uzziah's son Jotham assumed the government, but the memory of his father's fall remained as an eternal reminder. Disobedience to God, the pride that places oneself above the Creator's will, always generates inevitable consequences. This lesson is so powerful that it transcends the centuries. Leaders, rulers, and ordinary people who ignore spiritual principles and divine guidance are subject to unexpected downfalls, for God honors his justice and does not allow human presumption to go unpunished. But the episode of Uzziah goes beyond simple punishment. It marks a turning point in the history of Judah and in the life of Isaiah. It was precisely during this period of spiritual crisis, as the nation faced internal insecurities and external threats, that Isaiah, an ordinary man, was called to an extraordinary mission. God not only judged the pride of a king, but also raised up a prophet capable of transforming fear into hope, punishment into learning, and despair into faith. The divine touch that marked Uzziah, therefore, also became the prelude to a new era of spiritual revelation, preparing the ground for Isaiah to see heavenly glory, understand God's eternal plan, and convey messages that would span the centuries. Uzziah's punishment teaches us that the true strength of a leader, like the true security of a people, never lies in self-sufficiency or the accumulation of wealth and power. It lies in recognizing God's sovereignty, in obedience to His will, and in the humility to understand that all authority and success are sustained by the Creator. Every detail of the king's life, from his pride to his humiliation, reminds us that Jerusalem, even shaken by physical tremors, also witnessed spiritual tremors that would forever change the destiny of the city and its people. It's fascinating to see how this past episode connects with what we saw later. God acts not only to punish, but also to reveal His glory, prepare hearts, and raise up human instruments like Isaiah to proclaim His justice, mercy, and eternal promises. The lesson is clear. Divine intervention is comprehensive and profound, and even a king's pride can be transformed into an opportunity for learning and strengthening collective faith. After the shocking punishment that fell upon King Uzziah, Jerusalem experienced not only physical tremors, but also spiritual tremors that heralded profound transformations in the sacred history of God's people. In this context of crisis, fear, and uncertainty, Isaiah, a seemingly ordinary man, saw his life transformed in an extraordinary way. He was not of royal blood, nor did he hold political power. Yet God chose him to be the channel of His message, to bear witness to His glory and proclaim both divine judgment and mercy. And it is at this moment that the narrative takes on a dimension that transcends time, showing that God's call to His work does not depend on status, wealth, or human ability, but on a heart willing to obey. The story takes us directly to the temple, the sacred place, where Isaiah, perhaps seeking guidance and understanding in the face of a nation shaken by Uzziah's pride and external threats, encountered something that would change his life forever. Imagine the prophet standing, surrounded by a spiritually charged atmosphere, the temple's pillars rising imposingly, and the air filled with the aroma of incense, a setting that in itself evoked reverence and awe. And it was precisely there that Isaiah beheld the heavenly vision, a revelation so powerful that his words, recorded in the Bible, still make us feel the magnitude of God's presence today. He saw the Lord seated on a high and majestic throne, and the edges of the divine robe filled the entire temple, symbolizing that God's holiness is limitless, that His glory encompasses everything, transcends all dimensions of the universe, and dominates every aspect of creation. Above the throne, the seraphim, six-winged celestial beings, incessantly proclaimed God's holiness. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. The scene was one of power and holiness, incomprehensible to any human being, and the intensity of the vision filled the entire temple with dense smoke, symbolizing the absolute and impenetrable presence of the Creator. Upon realizing his own sinfulness in the face of infinite holiness, Isaiah could not contain his anguish. He immediately recognized that despite his seemingly upright life, his lips and the lips of the people around him were impure, incapable of bearing the majesty of the living God. Woe is me! I am condemned, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, he exclaimed, reflecting his profound awareness of human frailty in the face of divine perfection. But God, in His mercy, did not leave Isaiah in this state of despair. He sent a seraph to the prophet, bringing a burning coal from the altar, which touched his lips and symbolized the complete purification of his sins and failings. With this purification, Isaiah was ready to receive the most extraordinary mission of his life. He clearly heard God's voice asking, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And without hesitation, Isaiah responded with courage and faith, "Here am I, send me." At that moment, the prophet became the quintessential human instrument for conveying the Creator's message, confronting kings, guiding the people, and announcing prophecies that would span centuries. The vision not only revealed God's heavenly glory, but also prepared Isaiah to face the rejection, challenges and disbelief of those to whom he would be sent, demonstrating that obeying God often requires courage, resilience, and unwavering faith, even when the world around him remains blind to spiritual truths. Isaiah's call and his heavenly vision remind us that just as God transformed the life of an ordinary man into an instrument of divine revelation, he can also intervene in our own lives, revealing his plan, his glory, and empowering us to fulfill greater purposes. This transcendental experience shows that true spiritual leadership is not based on titles or privileges, but on a willingness to serve and obey the Lord. It is fascinating to think that even in times of fear, crisis, and uncertainty, God's intervention always finds those willing to hear his voice, to see beyond the visible, and to walk in faith, spreading light amidst the darkness. And it is precisely at this point that Isaiah's narrative connects directly with the reality of Jerusalem. The king's pride and divine judgment prepared the ground for God's glory to be revealed so that the prophet could receive his mission and through his words offer hope, guidance, and warning to the nation. But as the story continues to unfold, divine intervention had not yet reached its climax. What would follow would involve not only external threats, but also crucial decisions by kings and the people themselves in a sacred storyline that still resonates today, showing God's power, justice, and mercy at work in human history in profound and unforgettable ways. When Jerusalem found itself surrounded by the fearsome Assyrian army led by Sennacherib, fear gripped hearts. Every street, every wall, and every temple vibrated with the tension of a seemingly insurmountable threat. The Assyrian commander Rabsasis entered the walls with words of arrogance and mockery, challenging the faith of the people and belittling the power of the God of Israel. He declared loudly, full of pride and contempt, "Listen to the words of the great king of Assyria. He cannot save you. Surrender, and you will have peace. The gods of other nations were able to save their people from my hand. Who is the Lord that he should deliver you?" Each word was a direct attack on the people's faith, an attempt to shake their trust in God and make King Hezekiah doubt his own history and mission. Hezekiah, realizing the gravity of the situation, refused to be paralyzed by fear. He tore his clothes in mourning and humiliation, covering himself with sackcloth, and went to the temple of the Lord. There, in silence and reverence, he began the most intense prayer of his life. He cried out not only for physical protection or immediate deliverance, but for all humanity to recognize God's supremacy and faithfulness. Every word of his prayer was filled with sincerity, repentance, and recognition of the Lord's greatness. Hezekiah knew that no human power could replace divine intervention. His heart opened to the spiritual universe, seeking a direct connection with the Creator, asking that God's glory be manifested before all who doubted. God's answer was not long in coming. Isaiah, the prophet who had already endured decades of messages and visions, brought the king words of hope and certainty. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, do not be afraid of the words you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. I will put a disturbing spirit within him. He will hear rumors and return to his own land, and there he will be killed by the sword." These words resonated deeply with Hezekiah and all who heard them, demonstrating that the Lord's protection does not depend on human strategies or weapons, but on his sovereign will and direct intervention in the course of history. But divine intervention manifested itself in an even more extraordinary way. Shortly thereafter, a supernatural intervention ended the Assyrian threat. Jerusalem was spared, and Sennacherib returned to his land defeated, demonstrating that trust in God's plan surpasses any human power. This historic event not only saved the city, but became an eternal testament to the Lord's care and glory. Isaiah had once again demonstrated that sacred history is marked by divine faithfulness, that every tremor, every battle, and every crisis are opportunities for God's glory to be manifested in an unparalleled way. As the people of Judah witnessed divine deliverance, Isaiah took the opportunity to deepen the nation's spiritual understanding. He pointed to the coming of the suffering servant, the promised Messiah, the one who, centuries later, would take upon himself the pains and sins of all humanity. The prophecy of the suffering servant was not merely a distant or symbolic vision. It was a real and concrete promise that God would intervene decisively in history, bringing salvation, reconciliation, and eternal hope. Isaiah described this servant as someone filled with the Spirit of God, righteous, obedient, and capable of enduring suffering for the sake of humanity, showing that even in adversity the divine plan is greater than any fear or temporal attack. The narrative of Jerusalem, King Hezekiah, and the prophet Isaiah teaches us that true faith is not passive. It is active, engaging, and demands courage, trust, and total surrender to God's power. Every prayer, every gesture of repentance, and every word of Isaiah resonates to this day as a call to spiritual action, recognizing God's sovereignty, understanding that sacred history is under His authority, and that the spiritual universe acts concretely in the lives of those who believe. Even in the face of powerful nations, real threats, and human pride that insists on defying the Creator, history shows us that divine intervention is always effective. The deliverance of Jerusalem was not merely a military or political event, but a profound testimony to the glory of God, the Lord's faithfulness to His promises, and the importance of maintaining firm faith even in times of crisis. Isaiah, through his prophecies and words, invites us to see beyond the visible, to recognize God's presence in every challenge, and to connect with the spiritual universe, understanding that sacred history is not just about the past, but about God's ongoing action in our lives. This combination of faith, hope, and divine intervention creates a direct parallel with the eternal message of the gospel, that even when problems seem insurmountable, the power of the Lord can transform the impossible into reality, and that every spiritual or physical crisis is an opportunity to witness His glory, experience His deliverance, and fully trust in the promise of redemption and salvation that spans generations. After the deliverance of Jerusalem, attention turned to King Hezekiah himself, whose health was in danger. He had faced moments of intense anguish, and the severity of his illness seemed impossible to reverse without God's direct intervention. But amidst all the pressure, the king's faith never wavered completely. He recognized his dependence on the Creator and knew that only through sincere prayer and repentance could he find true deliverance. Hezekiah's story shows us that even the most powerful leaders depend on divine grace, and that the spiritual universe works concretely in our lives when we seek connection with Him with an open heart. It was then that Isaiah, the prophet who had already witnessed so many manifestations of God's glory, brought the king an extraordinary message. "Thus says the Lord, I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears, and I will heal you. In 3 days you will go up to the house of the Lord." These words were not merely comfort, but a real sign of divine intervention, showing that sacred history is guided by the power of God, who transforms desperate situations into visible miracles. The instruction to prepare himself with a poultice of figs applied to his wound was not merely medicinal, it was symbolic, demonstrating the alliance between human care and God's supernatural action. Every detail, every gesture reinforced that the spiritual universe is always attentive to the prayers of those who trust in the Lord. Hezekiah's recovery became a visible testament to God's sovereignty. Within days, the king who had previously seemed on the brink of death walked again, strong and refreshed, demonstrating God's faithfulness to those who turned to him in humility. But God didn't stop there. Isaiah revealed another extraordinary sign, this time involving Akash's sundial. When Hezekiah asked for a sign of confirmation, the prophet prayed to the Lord, and supernaturally the sun's shadow receded 10 degrees, exactly as it had advanced before. This event not only confirmed the king's healing, but also reinforced the eternal truth. The Creator's power transcends human understanding, and his control over sacred history is absolute. The message to the people of Judah was clear. God's glory is manifested not only in the defeat of visible enemies, but also in the restoration of life, the confirmation of promises, and the revelation of signs that strengthen the faith of those who believe. Isaiah took the opportunity to emphasize the importance of a life centered on the Lord, showing that true devotion is not found in riches or vanity, but in faithfulness, justice, and obedience. Each action of the king and each divine intervention became living symbols of God's presence, demonstrating that sacred history is also a spiritual lesson, teaching how to trust and recognize the power of the spiritual universe in all circumstances. Furthermore, Hezekiah's recovery and the miraculous signs served as spiritual preparation for what was to come, the revelation of the Messiah. Isaiah, ever attentive to divine instructions, continued to teach that every intervention of God, every deliverance and every sign was a foretaste of the greater plan of redemption, showing that the suffering servant and the Prince of Peace would come as the fulfillment of eternal promises. The people learned that miracles and signs are not just isolated events, but part of sacred history, which points to the constant presence of the Lord among his people. And so the city of Jerusalem, King Hezekiah, and the prophet Isaiah became symbols of faith, perseverance, and hope, reminding us that even in times of fear, crisis, and threat, the spiritual universe acts on behalf of those who trust in divine action. Deliverance and healing were concrete testimonies of God's power, showing that he not only judges and protects, but also restores, comforts, and prepares his people for the fulfillment of his eternal will. While Hezekiah was recovering and strengthening, Isaiah continued to convey messages of hope and promise to the people of Judah. Every prophecy, every word spoken by the prophet pointed to something greater than the immediate context: the coming of the Messiah, Emmanuel, the suffering servant who would bear the sins and sorrows of all humanity. Isaiah described in rich detail the character of this promised king, the plan of salvation, and the justice that would transcend all generations, demonstrating that sacred history does not end with temporal victories, but culminates in eternal redemption. The prophet's words became spiritual beacons for all who faced fear, disbelief, or impossible challenges. He reminded us that even in the face of human pride, threats from neighboring nations, and internal crises, God keeps his plan intact, guiding every event, every decision, and every outcome according to his sovereign will. Isaiah revealed that the Messiah would come as a leader of peace, just and compassionate, bringing light to those who dwell in darkness and hope to those who feel lost, reaffirming that the spiritual universe acts not only in the history of kings and empires, but in the life of every individual who surrenders to faith. At the same time, Isaiah warned against idolatry, vanity, and empty religiosity, reminding us that true devotion requires a pure heart, righteous actions, and care for those in need. He proclaimed that the Lord desires his people to live with practical holiness, demonstrating love, compassion, and daily obedience. Each past event, each tremor, each divine intervention was not just a historical occurrence, but a spiritual lesson that teaches us how to trust, obey, and recognize God's action in the real world and in the spiritual universe. Isaiah's final message extends to the present day. Even amid pain, fear, and adversity, God's glory is revealed to those who wait for him. The deliverance of Jerusalem, the healing of Hezekiah, and the miraculous signs point to an eternal reality of hope, restoration, and redemption. Isaiah invites us to recognize our spiritual need, to open our eyes to divine intervention, and to connect deeply with the God who is just, holy, and faithful. If you felt God's voice in this video, if you felt the call to strengthen your faith, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and join this community of seekers of spiritual truth. Leave a comment with something that touched your heart during this story, and share which teaching or prophecy impacted you most. Don't forget to like this video, showing your appreciation for this content that reveals God's glory and care. And to continue this journey of faith and discovery, watch the next video that's appearing on the screen, where we'll further explore the wonders of the Bible, the spiritual universe, and sacred history, keeping the flame of hope and divine connection alive in your life.